I have a quilt that Ray used to say when he looked off the mountain that everything looked like a patchwork quilt. And the changes he guessed in the JackTales were coming because the changes in the Appalachian Mountains came with the Florida people. And he used to say, I sit in my porch and wonder what kind of JackTales those rich Florida people are going to be telling. And so somebody came along sharing a JackTale with Ray, and he got all twisted out of shape because the person sharing the tale had Jack going to a funeral home. And so I came up, I guess, the next day, and he says, now that feller was really nice as could be, but he's up here telling me about Jack going to a funeral home. Now, Jack ain't never seen a funeral home. And he said, the guy about run off the mountain when I started telling how people really did get buried up here. And it was the barber who usually buried you. So, at any rate, we used to tease Bob because his footprints, this is a picture made that day, and you can see Bob Timberlake's footprints in the snow. And the other footprints that are missing is this is the Johnny house. And so there are no footprints in the snow going to the Johnny house. And so we're always happy when we see Bob to tell him, remember, you never did get that accurately. You might need to paint that one over again. But interestingly enough, this was the #1 print he ever sold in all of his collections, and the original sold in New York City at the Hammer Gallery for $54,000. Interesting. Well, it's just such an irony that here's the poorest man I ever knew, and I became so infatuated with writing about him because we're in our society now, we're so stuck on celebrity, and most of us are mature enough to know that celebrities all smoke and mirrors. And what you see of a model in a photograph is not what you really get. And some of you have seen that Dove 30-second video where they make up the model and show how this ordinary-looking person that looks like every woman is suddenly the beauty queen of the world. And the last thing they do before they frame her shot is they stretch her neck digitally. So they have this beautiful woman, and it shows in quick time. You could probably go on the Dove website and see it, but they have a new program for women having more self-respect and not wanting to look so plastic, and it's a very interesting thing. So in the meantime, the JackTales are exactly how it is. There are no smoke and mirrors. There was nothing celebrity about Ray Hicks. He lived in a house that never had indoor plumbing. He had like a 40-watt light bulb hanging from the ceiling in his front room. He never wanted to have any electric in the house, and he only did it because his wife wanted a refrigerator because she got tired of using the spring outside. And the irony of that whole thing is that they captured water in a brand new bathtub. So they had a little old shed that you can't see, but it looks just about like that, and they had a bathtub in the shed. And so the clear water, mountain stream, would stream into the bathtub, and the bathtub was the collector of the water. So they would have clean water, and they would take a galvanized bucket and go out and haul the water into the house. So it was such an irony to me that they didn't have a bathtub in the house, but they had a brand new bathtub in the shed that was gathering water. And they had an old-time bathtub like you see in the old Western movies. And they used that, and he used that until he passed away. And so that's what you see is what you get. The ladder, we asked one time, why is the ladder up there? And he said that in case of a chimney fire, that they would crawl up there and they would put out the chimney fire. And then they would also climb up there and would fill a gunny sack with the outside leaves of cabbages, and they would fill it, and they would drop the gunny sack down to clean the fireplace out with cabbages. So when people read that Jack actually went and hollered out the king, and Jack went to the blacksmith and had a belt made, and Jack saw a little piece of wood on the road, and he whittled it out into a paddle, because nobody that lived in the mountains in the 1800s up until, say, 1960s wasted anything. If there was the smallest piece of fabric left, it could go in a quilt. If the kids wore out their blue jeans, they made a quilt out of blue jeans. If they couldn't afford batting to put in the middle of the quilt, they used newspaper. They actually took envelopes, steamed them apart, and turned them wrong side out. They wrote, if you wrote a letter, and we still have a friend that does this. I have a very unusual friend that helps to keep the language. She's a very bright person in her 40s, but she values the Appalachian ways so much that she's like she's going to be the last living person saying sitch and Ader. And Bert was saying to her the same way he would say to Ray Hicks, Ray, what time is it? And Ray would say 7, 8, or 9, and you have to go, okay. He never says before. He says afore. He never says after. He says 8. So it was 7 minutes after 9. So it's a thing that's worth keeping, and there's not really much left in our culture that's really American. And the JackTales are really American, and they're all that came to the New World with the colonists that probably still exist except for a few buildings. And the essence of the JackTales and Ray Hicks's value is that he lived this old mountain way, claiming that he kept seeing storytellers go to the National Storytelling Festival, and they started getting a little fame and making a little money, and they got more with gold jewelry and makeup. And he would say, and that ruined them all. That ruined them all. Because he said so many of them arrived when I did 25 years ago, and they were just good storytellers because they could remember their family history, they could remember times the way they were, they could remember stories their grandmothers told them. But when they started touring the country, they would all get managers and agents, and the managers and agents would tell them, you got to have a headshot. So then they'd have to go to glamour shots. And he used to get a kick out of these Appalachian storytellers going to glamour shots to send out marketing photos. So there were people who rejected him because he would go on stage at the National Storytelling Festival and somebody would holler out, Ray, play us John Henry. He loved John Henry. And he would look over to the side where his wife was standing, and over the microphone he'd say, Mama, bring me my teeth. And so his wife would run out on stage and give him his teeth because he could tell the stories better without his teeth. But if he was going to get his French harp out and play a little John Henry, he was going to have to put his teeth in. So I knew that I was accepted the time I was up there, and he said, Lynn, come here. And so I went over thinking he was going to tell me something. He pops his teeth out and puts them in my hand before I knew what was happening. And I was actually transfixed because that's not something that I relish, is having anybody's teeth in my hand as much as I liked him. And his wife was in the kitchen and heard him do that, and she came running into the main room yelling, you can't do that! Give me those teeth! And she grabbed them right out of my hand. And so she said, I'll go clean your teeth. Don't you be asking Lynn to clean your teeth. She ain't going to do it. So it was interesting. So Ray said, them old stories has been everything to me. They've guided my life and caused me to feel the spirit of my granddaddy Ben. And that's the origin of the direct descendancy. The best part of my life went by before I got into storytelling for a little pay. The stories of my family from back to the 1700s all passed to me. And with them come the gift for talking. I was brought up to be an adult the same way the frontiering people was. That's how I've kept the talent. I've lived it. I feel every word of my stories in my heart. And therein is the relevancy of the young trickster guy that everybody knows he is the youngest of 3 boys, or he wouldn't be Jack. And everybody knows that the Jack stories or JackTales play out in 3s. Like the Trinity, like all ancient stories play out in 3s. 3 challenges, 3 strikes you're out, 3 wishes. And you know when they've been tampered with from the origins, because the old folks would sit around and they would give the girl 1 wish. And Ray said they would do that because they knew it would tear up the young'uns. and the young'uns would be yelling, no, Daddy, it's 3 wishes. And he'd say, no, this is my story, and it's 1 wish. That's all she's a-getting. So they like to sit around, and that's where the story of spinning yarns came from, because everybody has the right to take the story and make it their own. I love doing that in my classes because I think it empowers people. We're living in such a technological age that things are in stone. And students don't understand a lot of the concept of thinking through what could be outside of the boundaries of what the story is, because the story is written, and it's the same as written in stone. In the old days of oral history, storytelling, oral tellings, the story could change, because you could get in a mighty argument with somebody if Dr. Frank told a story and we remembered it differently. We might be fighting for days over what he said that you said he didn't say, that I said he said, you said he didn't say, and we would go back and forth. And therefore, that's relevant scenery in stories, because that's what kids did. That's like the dialogue that can go with these stories. But now, kids go to movies, they see things on TV, they play video games, everything is recorded, everything's on TV, and it's all written in stone. So when we have these philosophical disagreements, or we have these creative disagreements, there's no argument, because one of us can go back and prove it to the other. So a lot of the value of storytelling and keeping it alive is actually keeping that imagination alive, the variety of the unproven.